On the night of June 20, 1631, every single person in the village of Baltimore, Ireland, was asleep. By morning, 237 of them were gone. Not dead. Gone. Chained inside the hulls of Algerian corsair ships, already crossing the Atlantic toward North Africa, and the English crown did almost nothing to stop it. This story never made it into your history class. And the reason why is almost as disturbing as the raid itself. Most people think of the Barbary pirates as a minor footnote, a distant threat that mostly affected Mediterranean shipping lanes. What they never told you is that these corsairs operated as far north as Iceland. They raided the coasts of England, Ireland, France, and Spain for over 2 centuries. And on that one night in June, they pulled off the most audacious slave raid in the recorded history of the British Isles. The man who made it happen was not some anonymous raider. His name was Murat Rees the Younger. And his story alone should be in every history textbook on earth. Murat Rees was born January Janszoon van Haarlem, a Dutchman, a Christian, a sailor who was captured by Algerian pirates around 1618, converted to Islam, and became one of the most feared corsair captains in the Atlantic world. He was not just a pirate. He was the Grand Admiral of the Salé Corsairs, operating out of what is now Morocco. He had a European mind and a North African fleet, and he knew exactly how to find undefended coastal villages that no one was watching. And Baltimore, Ireland, was not watching. The village sat on the southwestern tip of Cork County. It was small, mostly Protestant English settlers who had moved there in the early 1600s. They were not particularly well liked by the surrounding Irish population, who had their own complicated relationship with English colonization. That tension becomes important in a moment. On the evening of June 19, Murat Rees anchored a fleet of 2 warships and several smaller vessels just off the coast. He had a guide. That detail is one of the darkest parts of this story. A man named John Hackett, an Irish fisherman with debts and grudges, allegedly provided Murat Rees with detailed information about the village layout, the number of residents, and the best time to strike. Whether he fully understood what he was enabling is still debated. What is not debated is that he was later tried and hanged for it. Just before dawn on June 20, roughly 200 corsairs came ashore. They moved through the village in organized teams. They broke down doors. They dragged people from their beds. They worked quickly, professionally, and silently enough that many houses in Baltimore did not even wake up before their neighbors were already gone. 237 people were taken that night. Men, women, children. The youngest captives were toddlers. The oldest was a woman in her 80s. They were loaded onto the ships before the sun fully rose, and by the time the remaining villagers realized what had happened, the fleet was already disappearing over the horizon. If this surprised you, subscribe right now. Because this channel exists specifically to cover the history they decided you did not need to know. Now here is the layer that makes this story genuinely haunting. Of those 237 people, historians can confirm that only 2 ever returned to Ireland. 2 out of 237. The rest spent the remainder of their lives enslaved in North Africa, primarily in Algiers and the coastal towns of what is now Algeria and Morocco. The English government received frantic letters from Baltimore survivors begging for a ransom negotiation or a military rescue. Those letters still exist in the British state papers. The Crown expressed concern. They commissioned a report. They debated. And then they largely moved on, because Baltimore was a small village on the far edge of Ireland, and full military engagement with the Barbary coast was expensive and politically complicated. Some captives were ransomed years later through private efforts, mostly by Catholic religious orders who made it their mission to purchase the freedom of European slaves in North Africa. But the scale was overwhelming. Hundreds of thousands of Europeans were enslaved by Barbary corsairs between 1530 and 1830. The number is estimated between 1 million and 1.25 million people over that period. That fact sits awkwardly alongside the dominant historical narrative, so it tends to get left out of the curriculum. Murat Rees himself had a remarkable afterlife in history. After the Baltimore raid he continued operating, eventually retired to Salé, and reportedly had a European wife and children alongside his North African family. His daughter, Rachel van Haarlem, spent years trying to locate and free him. Their correspondence survives. It reads like something from a novel, except it actually happened. The village of Baltimore never fully recovered. The English settlers who were left behind largely abandoned it, The population collapsed. A village that had been carefully built up over decades simply ceased to function, because too many of the people who made it work had vanished in a single night. Today Baltimore, Ireland, is a quiet, beautiful fishing village. Tourists come for the seafood and the harbor views. There is a small plaque. Most visitors do not know what happened there. Most people who have heard of the Barbary pirates do not know they came this far north, this successfully, and took this many people in one operation. The raid on Baltimore forces us to reconsider the geography of the slave trade, the reach of North African maritime power, and the uncomfortable reality that slavery in the early modern world was not a single-directional story. It was messier. It crossed racial and religious lines in ways that still make people uncomfortable to confront. A Dutch Christian became a Muslim admiral. An Irishman guided him to an English village. 237 people disappeared into a world their families could not follow. And the empire that was supposed to protect them filed a report and moved on. That is not a footnote. That is history. If you want more stories like this, the ones they buried under the comfortable version, subscribe and hit the bell. Next week we go deeper into the Barbary slave trade and the European governments who decided the ransom was not worth paying.